Which equation can be used to determine the reference angle R if theta is equal to 7 pi over 12? So let's talk a little bit about what a reference angle is. So first of all, when we talk about the terminal side of an angle, all right, so say if the angle is in the first quadrant, then the angle that we're talking about is right here. Okay, so this would be theta. Okay, now, what if the angle is in the second quadrant? So here's an angle that's in the second quadrant. Okay, well that's the terminal side. The angle goes like this. Now, the reference angle, there's something called a reference angle though, that's always measured against the x-axis. So this R that they're talking about lives right here between the terminal side and the x-axis. So if I wanted to find out what this is, I need to remember the fact that this is pi right here. Okay, so if this is pi, and by the way, this is 2 pi way over here, so the reference angle is between pi and the angle. In fact, just to make it a little bit more obvious, instead of writing my theta there, I'm going to go ahead and put it right on the terminal side. So see how the reference angle is between pi and theta? So in this quadrant, we could say that R equals pi minus theta. It's always going to be the bigger one minus the smaller one. Okay, what about in the third quadrant? Okay, so here comes an angle that's in the third quadrant. Alright, here we are in quadrant 3. So, the angle theta is like this. Okay, so I'll put my theta on the terminal side again to make it really obvious. But remember, the reference angle is always between the terminal side and the x-axis. So the reference angle R is right here. Now remember, this is pi radians, okay, right at 180 degrees, that's pi. So in the third quadrant, we could say that R is equal to theta minus pi, because it's between theta and pi. And we have to do the bigger one minus the smaller one. Alright, so any angle in this quadrant, the reference angle will be theta minus pi. Now, what about the fourth quadrant? Okay, so here comes an angle in the fourth quadrant. So the actual angle theta would look like this. And I'm going to go ahead and just mark the theta right on the terminal side to make this more obvious. Now the reference angle is always between the terminal side and the x-axis. So the reference angle R is right here. Okay, now remember that this is 2 pi, alright, because if I went all the way around. So that means in the fourth quadrant, the reference angle is going to be 2 pi minus theta. Alright, always has to be the bigger one minus the smaller one. And it's between these two, so 2 pi minus theta. Alright, so any angle in this quadrant, this is the formula for the reference angle. Alright, I sort of skipped over the first quadrant, which is the simplest. Well, if you happen to be in the first quadrant, then guess what? The reference angle and the actual angle are the same thing, because it's already measured between the x-axis and the terminal side. Okay, so if you happen to be in the first quadrant, R equals theta, and it's just that simple. So basically, back to this particular question, they're giving us 7 pi over 12. All we have to do is figure out which quadrant we're in, and then that will give us the answer. So here's what I like to do. I'm going to use my calculator to help me out. Okay, so 7 over 12. Let's just look at that part. So let's take a calculator and do 7 divided by 12. Okay, so 7 divided by 12. That is 0.58. Alright, so keep that in mind. That means that theta is equal to 0.58 pi. Let's use this to help us figure out which quadrant we're in. In fact, let's do a whole new drawing off to the side to make this really clear. Remember that this is pi right here. So you could think of this as 1 pi. Now up here at the top, this is halfway to pi. So this is half of pi, or just to put it as a nice decimal, I could say that this is 0.5 pi. Okay, now this is 1 pi. Now down here will be 1.5 pi. So this would be 1.5 pi. And then of course all the way back around would be 2 pi. So looking at it this way, we can easily tell what quadrant we're in. So 0.58 pi is a little bit more than 0.5, but it's definitely less than 1. So that tells us that the angle must be in the second quadrant. Alright, it's a little bit more than 0.5 pi. And what did we say? When we're in the second quadrant, that means the reference angle is going to be right here between pi and the angle. So in the second quadrant, the reference angle is pi minus the angle, pi minus theta. So that's why the answer is this, pi minus theta. All right, check mark, we got it. Wait, I want to say one more thing before I end this video. I walked you through step by step showing you where these little formulas came from, but really at this point I want you to write this down in your notes and use it. Okay, so r equals theta, that's the quadrant 1. R equals pi minus theta, that's quadrant 2. R equals theta minus pi, that's quadrant 3. And r equals 2 pi minus theta, that's quadrant 4. So look, write down this chart in your notes right now. I don't want you to have to think through all of this every time. Just refer back to this, then all you have to do is make the decimal, use the decimal to figure out which quadrant you're in, and then write down the appropriate rule. That's it.